Okay, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the latest Ireland's Future event here this evening. You're all welcome to the Radisson Blu Hotel here in Letterkenny. I suppose before we get the discussion underway, let me firstly tell you a bit about these events and their aim. Ireland's Future was established to advocate and promote debate and discussion about Ireland's future, including the possibility and viability of new constitutional arrangements on the island. And there has been a number of these events and panel-type discussions already, where the largest events will take place in the 3 Arena in Dublin on Saturday, October 1st. Now, before we get underway, let me introduce myself and the panel. I suppose, first of all, my name's Barry White. Some people here may know me from my time working in local radio in Donegal. I worked there for many years. I used to live in Letterkenny, and it's great to be back here and to be back in the Northwest, where I'm from. I'm now Chief Reporter with Bauer Media Audio Ireland, so you'll mainly hear me on News Talk and Today FM. Like I say, I'm from the Northwest. I grew up in the Strabane, Lifford area, so I know what it's like to live in an area that has been impacted by partition. For me, like a lot of people in the Northwest, I always have two currencies in my wallet, and when I was living here and growing up here, I would have crossed the border every day, and my father and my parents still cross the border every day. And where I grew up in the Northwest area has always felt the impact of partition, lower wages, not as much job creation, although things are not as bad now as they used to be. There's many people I know, like many people from Donegal, Tyrone and Derry, who have longed for a united Ireland, a new Ireland, and they'll be happy that these discussions are happening. But I think it's not just about the romance of a united Ireland anymore. For a lot of people, it's about what impact will a new Ireland have economically? What will it mean for health, education, housing? So that's what we'll be aiming to discuss here this evening. I'm also quite mindful on the panel that there's no unionists or loyalists here, so I've met and interviewed many loyalists over the last number of years, so I'd like to put their concerns and how they're going to fit into this to the panel as well. Before we get underway, let me introduce the panellists. Everyone will know Sinn Féin's finance spokesperson, Deputy Pearse Doherty. Pearse has been a TD here for the Donegal constituency since the 2016 general election, and he was previously a TD for the Donegal Southwest constituency from 2010 to 2016. Donegal Independent TD Thomas Pringle, everyone will know him here as well. He's been a TD for Donegal since 2016 as well, and previously he was a TD from 2011 to 2016 in the Donegal Southwest constituency. Eileen Flynn is also on the panel this evening. Eileen is an independent politician who served as a senator since June 2020 after being nominated by the Taoiseach. Her background is in community development and activism on behalf of Irish travellers, and Eileen is the first ever traveller to be a member of the Oireachtas. Maria Nwini is an Irish fiddler. I hope I pronounced that right, Maria, because my Irish is non-existent. She's a lead vocalist for the Irish folk music band Alton. Today, Maria is recognised as the leading exponent in the Donegal fiddle style, and she is often considered one of the foremost singers in Irish language. And Taiba Hamed is a community worker. She ran in the local elections here in Donegal in 2019. She considers herself Sudanese Irish. She lives here in Letterkenny, is involved in many community groups. So I suppose, first of all, before we get to the discussion, we'll get the panellists to come up and tell us how they view Ireland's future in about, just give everyone will get about 5 minutes each. So Thomas, if you want to come up first.
Thanks very much, Barry, and I got the short straw, got the first option coming up here. So, yeah, I'd just like to thank Barry for the introduction here tonight, and thank everybody for coming out. It's great to see such a crowd here. And I would like to just take this opportunity to thank Ireland's Future for the invitation to address this meeting tonight, because I think it is a very important topic, and I think it is something that we should be discussing openly and across the board, right across the country at all times, because I think it is the one thing that is and should be a defining factor for us as Irish people, whether you are unionist or nationalist or whatever. It should be important from that point of view. And I think tonight is part of leading up to the event in October, on the 1st of October in the 3 Arena, where the national event is taking place, and as part of that event, that as well. And I think that's important, that as many people as possible could tune into that event too. So like I said, I think it's very important, and it is something that we should all be discussing in whatever way we can. There is no doubt also that us politicians certainly don't have all the answers, and we shouldn't pretend to have the answers either. But what we do have, rightly or wrongly, is the ability to be heard or to get a say and put our piece across in public. And that's whether people agree with that or not, that's the reality of the situation as a politician. You do get that. So I think it is as important for all of us, North and South, that have something to contribute to this conversation, to actually get our say and to make that contribution. So in order to talk about our future, I think it is important to be aware of our past and how it has impacted on our present and can affect the future as well. That is not to dwell on the past, but to be aware of it. In that context, and in the context of considering a united Ireland, I think it is important to look at population trends on both these islands and look at how we have ended up where we are. In 1800, the population of England was 10.5 million, and the population of Ireland was 5.5 million. In 1900, the population of England was 32.5 million, and the population of Ireland was 4.6 million. And we all know why that is, and it's because of the famine, and that the population actually declined. And that took place between those dates. But I think what is interesting is the impact that had on our population and how that has affected everything else on this island. And I think that's very important, and I think we should always keep that in mind. Based on those figures from 1800, we could have expected that the population of Ireland would have been around 17 million in 1900, rather than 4.5 million. We could reasonably have expected that the population of the island to be around 25 to 30 million today. And I think that it would be a very different place if that happened and if that was the case, and that we would have a very different country. And it's debatable even whether we would have a country that had been partitioned at the time when it was as well. And so it is not unreasonable to assume that the context of Irish independence would have been totally different. Would we have ended up partitioned at all, as I said? But the reason I'm highlighting these figures is that even with the population of North and South together, currently we make up slightly less than 7 million people now. The changes that we have seen with cross-border health promotion and delivery show what can be done when the will is there. And that can be expanded to the rest of our lives, and we'll see all citizens develop with a greater population that makes changes real. It makes sense for us to be united in order for everything to prosper. The South with a population of around 5 million and the North with less than 2 million, neither is as viable as we could be together. Both parts of this island have suffered by not having enough of a population to survive or be viable. We have needed outside influences to be able to grow. It is time that we should be able to go forward together and see what we can achieve all as one. What form a united Ireland should take, I'm not fully sure yet, but I agree that it has to be along the lines of the Good Friday Agreement and the constitutional guarantees that are included in them. I think we as Irish people, whether Protestant, Catholic, dissenter, or as more and more people are now, people of no faith at all, should decide that together. As things stand now, unionism would permanently be in government with Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael in the United Ireland. That would be difficult for everyone on the left, but it is a reality, I believe, and as that, I would accept that in order to be able to change it down the road. I was at a meeting some time ago where left-wing people were shocked that would be the case, but I don't see how it could be any different given the way the country is set up now at the moment. They argued that they went on the left to see that happen. I agree with them, but what is I aspire to believe will happen. James Connolly knew it in 1916. Sorry, just get a drink of water. Yeah. James Connolly knew it in 1916 when he argued that we had to get rid of the British influence on Irish politics for a left solution to develop. And I think that's true today as it was then. I don't think much has changed on that front at all. I believe that the loyalist working class in the North would be a very important part of that left solution as well. I'm no expert on loyalism, but from what I'm looking at the North, I believe that they have been used and abused by all unionist parties who have been happy to see them act as their foot soldiers, but not be represented fully by them politically. Where they have catered for the money and ruling classes in the North rather than for their own citizens. The left, I believe, need the loyalist people in order to develop as well. There is no doubt that we should be focusing on what unites us rather than what the continuing division in the future. I think we must be very careful. I'm going to finish up now. I think we must be very careful when we talk about who is going to support reunification as well, and what is the price that they are going to extract from us for that support too. I am thinking of the EU in this context. Is it to be giving up neutrality that is going to get their support? Is that a price worth paying? I think that is something that we have to think about long and hard about, as well as what is actually going to be the cost for all of us in relation to getting support from those people. It is also something that must be part of the debate as well. The EU does nothing for our interests unless they match completely with their own. They have all the trappings of empire, just like the Brits had. So what is the price that will be expected of us to get their support? Do we have to have their support, and is it worth it? I think my time is nearly up now, so I will end on that. There's some more that I could say, and I would like to say. Maybe I'll get an opportunity during the questions and answers forum as well. But I hope that's been of some use, and we look forward to hearing the rest of the debate tonight as well. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Thomas. Eileen Flynn, do you want to come up next?
Firstly, I'd like to thank Ireland's Future for inviting me here today to give me the opportunity to speak on the floor. I did do a talk with Ireland's Future going back about 2 years ago, and I know I made a balls of it, if you want, and hopefully I won't do that today, this evening. For me, I walk into all spaces and I ask myself the question, who's not in the room? And it's very obvious who's not in the room here this evening. And I think that's our starting point, is getting nationalists into the room to be part of our conversation around an Ireland's future, because there's no right, I always say, there's no right or wrong way to be a member of the traveller community, because, you know, a lot of the time there's many different barriers that impact more so on traveller women than it does on traveller men. So I always say there's no right or wrong way to be a traveller person, like there's no right or wrong way to be an Irish person, if you want. I don't speak fluent Irish, and fortunately I haven't got much Irish at all, as I was put down the back of the class when Irish was going on in my school, you know, but that doesn't make me less Irish than my colleague, say Thomas Pringle, who would have a lot of Irish, and I shouldn't be ashamed of that, because that was an inequality that I endured underneath our education system because of being from the traveller community. Also, when we look at Ireland and we see Ireland, it's no longer the Ireland that we had 100 years ago. We have moved on a lot as a society. We have new communities. We if you want to say, you know, we like going back about 25 years ago was my first time to ever see a black person in Ireland, and I remember questioning my mother and saying, like, you know, asking a lot of questions as you would as a child. You know, our community and Ireland today are a very diverse community. People who have different religion, values and beliefs. People of colour, again, black people. We're no longer ashamed of disabilities. We're no longer, like, you know, if you were to have a child with special needs, we no longer put them away into institutions, and where they're going to more than likely end up, pass away, you know. So I think we're a very different Ireland than what we were going back even 50 years ago. I wouldn't mind today, I wouldn't mind going back 100 years ago, sorry. So that there is a starting point for me, and for me, I'd always say nothing about us without us. And I think it's so important that, you know, John Hume speaks about, like, you know, I would be a very big admirer of his, where he brings people around the table, and Thomas touched on it. It's not about, we don't have to agree on everything, but it's about having these conversations. It's about the common goal. And for me personally, the common goal is to be a united Ireland, and to do what we need to do to get that across the table. And Thomas also spoke around the Good Friday Agreement. Obviously, everybody on the island of Ireland should have a saying that people should be able to vote if they want an All-Ireland, and I think we're very close to that. But we shouldn't just want an All-Ireland. We need a fair Ireland. We need an Ireland that looks after our working class people, people from the traveller community, people of colour, refugee people, all of us, and that we all have a space around political tables, that we're all an equal voice within our society, because I think that's missing in this conversation. Also, again, I was the first ever member of the traveller community. Like, you know, the Shannon is 100 years up and running, and the Dáil as well, and it took 100 years to get somebody from the Indigenous community in Ireland around that table, you know, to be part of, because again, ethnic minority voices, if we like it or don't like it, are part of our Ireland, and I think that we should be included. And again, you know, I'd like to see, obviously, ideal, like coming in and you see Ireland's future. You want to speak about a future where there's no poverty on the island. You want to speak about the future where there's no homeless on the island. You want to speak about the future where we have equality of access to our health services, to education, to, if you want to learn Irish, you can learn it. If you don't have to, but the opportunity is there for you. So that's my ideal future Ireland, and I know it'll be long after I'm dead and buried before we'd even get anywhere near it. But again, I do think together we can achieve it, and I genuinely believe that it needs to be an inclusive Ireland as well as being an all-Ireland. So thanks so much.
Okay, thanks, Eileen, for that. And Mairead, do you want to come up next?
Gur míle maigah a chuirde. Tá has arm a bhain seo an ort le lórt le fada da tauhí na héireann. I'm a Gaelic speaker from the Gaeltacht. I'm very proud. And in a way, Gaelic speakers and the likes of myself, we're a minority as well on this island. I have to talk very strongly about that, because if you look at all the Gaeltacht areas on this island now, we're all at the verge of the country. Our Gaeltacht area is at the coast of Donegal. The next step is the water. The same down in Connemara, and the same in Kerry. The only place that has an inland one, it would be Coolay, and then that man-made one in County Meath. So we are a minority in our own country. Sometimes we're a minority when we speak Gaelic, and somebody says to us, "Why are you speaking that language?" Like neighbours in Donegal say that to me. Why are you speaking a language that's dead? It's not dead. It's been killed. It's been thrown to one side. And, you know, I have to agree with you, Senator Flynn, that, you know, we're all a minority, but we have to bring all these diversions together. And how more Irish can we be than with the language? You know, when the language dies, it's not only a language that dies, it'll be a psyche, a way of thinking. How was it, or how is it that our best writers in the English language, they wrote in Hiberno English, Hiberno English, which meant that they were thinking in Irish, or they had an Irish way of expressing the language, which is colourful and expressive. And do we want that to die? At the moment, as I'm speaking, there's a unionist in Ranafast learning Irish, Linda Irvine, and she's one of these lights in our nation. This is what the future is about, bringing everyone in. The language shouldn't be politicised. It should be everyone's language. It used to be everybody's language. So I think it's very important for me here as a fiddler, a Donegal fiddler, proud Donegal fiddler, and an Irish language enthusiast and speaker, that I'm here to bring that aspect to a future Ireland. So, sin ma chuid sa díobh, gur maigah.
Thanks, Mairead. Taiba, you want to come up next?
Good evening, everybody. Thanks for having me. My name is Taiba Hamed. I am Sudanese Irish. I want to start with my story. Once I arrived to Ireland around 8 years ago, I went to Derry, and when I went there, I have seen everybody's just, the features, the culture, the accent, everything the same. I don't recognize that there is any difference until I dive deep in the history. And I have seen the conflict, and I have seen the division. And I resonate with that, because me, in Sudan, my home country, we have the same, British colonialism. And the division just torn our country apart. And we're still struggling with that division. We cannot pull the revolution and democracy together because of that division. And then I just, started to learn along the way, and to figure out and to see how we're going, to have the future of this island, especially when I long ago considered myself, I belong here. But now I know, and I belong, and I am Irish, and I need, to understand and to do something about this. So my main argument to the future of the island of Ireland is that I will focus on the word hope. And this will take me from what I learned to the 90s, which is regarding the spirit and the mood and in that period, when the peace process were taken off. And I know the challenge, in spite of the challenges, but I can see the hope in that period of time. And the hope is to find an identity for us all. And we all agree on that. And all of us to be comfortable with, and that is including the people from different backgrounds, including the people from different cultures. It is a strength. And I just want to just borrow your word when you said you are a minority. I was a majority in my country, and I know how that feels. And now I am a minority. But that doesn't mean that we have the energy, or we can take the lead, or we can take the initiative, or we can do something about that. And to find the identity between the two communities, the main communities, there is some other communities, the marginalized or minoritized communities. We need to focus on that just to move along together, not to get back to something else, to triple or get back to that thing. So, and also I believe that unity process must be very slow and delicate. And also, I am aware of the difficulties and the differences and the division and all of that stuff. So it must be delicate, and we must believe that it's a long way. And from my own perspective as a community worker, I believe that, the best way to do it is the vision of communities. It is not only the territorial unity. It is the people, the unity of the people. And also to welcome people in our space. I can just give this example in this area. I am the only colored person over here. So we need to take the change in an actual way, to do it in an actual way. And I believe that those, the different cultures and the different communities, the different backgrounds will bring different perspective and will bring strength to our Ireland. Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks, Taiba, and Pearse, you're up next.
Gormaigat Barry, and sorry for I was delayed coming back from Leinster House. The traffic, and one of the benefits of a United Ireland is we might get that railway back into Donegal in the future. But I want to really begin by thanking Ireland's Future for organising this public meeting, and indeed the whole series of public meetings that they have, and very, very excited about, you know, the October meeting. I think Bob Dylan's playing the Three Arena, but the real show is going to be Ireland's Future there in the first. And just kind of going off my script here, but I was taken by, I don't know if anybody's seen Colin Harvey's video that went out this evening. I just thought it was fantastic. He's just walking along by the river, and he's saying, close your eyes and then think that you're there on the night of the referendum and the people have voted for constitutional change. Who are you going to think about in that second? Who are you going to lift the phone to phone? And are you going to be able to say that you were part of it, that you were part of the conversation? And everybody here tonight, by being part of this conversation, is being part of this change, of writing a history. And for me as an Irish Republican, I get up every morning to try and end British occupation of my country. That's my raison d'etre. It's the raison d'etre of my party. And it's a hugely exciting time because there's so much happening in terms of Irish unity, whether it's, you know, the Seanad, what's happening in terms of the consultation process that's ongoing within the Seanad at the minute, and the extension has been extended, the deadline's been extended for submissions till the 12th of October in terms of the constitutional future of Ireland. And it was great to see all of the different political parties and independents coming together in that video, asking people from right across the island of Ireland to make their submissions. Ourselves and Sinn Féin have launched our own commission on the future of Ireland, and asking people again to make their submissions of what they believe it should be. But I think that it's really, really important and exciting in the time ahead. And in the time ahead needs to be about preparing for a new United Ireland. It needs to be about planning for that. And as we discuss that tonight, it's important that we discuss context, because context is important as we discuss and prepare for Irish unification. We always need to remember, as been mentioned by other speakers, that we are speaking to different audiences, that different people will come from it with different perspectives. And all of this is rooted within the Good Friday Agreement, an agreement now that's 24 years old. And it's through that and through the consent of the Irish people that we will and can only achieve reunification. The consent of the people given in separate referenda, north and south. So we will have citizens here in Letterkenny voting in one referenda, while citizens in Derry and elsewhere will vote in another. And people will come at it, as I said, with different perspectives. In the north, those within the nationalist community will have their own perspective, and unionists will have their own perspectives in this, and will approach the referendum with a different set of concerns, a different set of opportunities, of hopes, and notwithstanding the identity of also those who neither define themselves as nationalists or unionists. And the questions, you know, which there'll be many, many questions, but they'll be about identity. These are the things that we need to talk about. They'll be about the future of our public services. They'll be about taxation. They'll be about living standards and opportunities. They'll be about what was mentioned earlier on, about hope. That idea, that's something that few countries have, the idea to start over again, to build a new nation, a new Ireland, to take the best of what we have, north, south, east and west, and leave the bits behind that weren't so good. The idea to recreate, to reinvent, and that's what excites me about the period ahead, the opportunities, the possibilities. And that's what we need to do as those who in this room believe in Irish reunification, believe in the idea of a new Ireland. We need to set out that vision as best as possible in an inclusive manner of how that future looks like, to convince the vast majority or the greatest number of people possible that that is the way forward. We know from, you know, in Donegal, we all know the effects of partition. It's impacted on us economically, it's impacted on us socially, it's impacted us in many, many ways. But one of the things that we do have, and sometimes we take for granted, is that we at least can elect a government and we can hold them to account. In the north, that doesn't exist. In the north, there is a huge democratic deficit at the heart of the union, and it has devastating consequences, and those consequences flow right into Donegal as well because of our peripheral nature and our connection with the border. So the people need to be given an opportunity to be able to determine their own future, determine the future for themselves, and that shouldn't be a controversial idea. It should be one that definitely isn't without its problems. But we have seen, after a century of independence, that in this state it has led to a higher level of living standards and opportunities for the people of the south compared to the north. And these gains couldn't have been made if it wasn't, if it was still within the Union. We know that Britain is now facing a decade of stagnation, a decade of high inflation, with higher inflation and less investment as a direct result of leaving the European Union, a decision that went completely against the majority view of those citizens in the north. And again, Britain is the sick man of Europe. So the north is an opportunity. The North is an opportunity to fulfil the potential of the Good Friday Agreement and chart a better future. It has an opportunity back into the European Union, and that's not something you need to convince the European Union of. They have already made that decision, which is a major difference from the independence and the movement in Scotland, which was a massive issue for them in terms of European membership. That is a settled issue as a result of the Council's decision a number of years ago that the North, if they vote, will be automatically back in the European Union. Others can discuss the positives or negatives for that, but there's no doubt that Brexit has propelled this discussion and has led to many others who never would have thought of having a discussion in terms of the future, the constitutional future of the North, are now starting to look at that. Listen, I have much more I would like to say. There's three things that we would like to see. We have to have this discussion. It has to be inclusive. The work that Ireland's Future is doing, the work that so many different NGOs, organisations, universities are doing. There's so much happening now in terms of research on Irish unity. But this also needs to be led by the Irish government. The Irish government needs to set out a pathway of what a new Ireland will look like. That needs to be in the form of a green paper, a discussion document that's inclusive. They need to set up a citizens' assembly so that citizens right across the island of Ireland can participate in a way that is inclusive in terms of shaping what a new Ireland would look like. And they also need to set up this all-party committee that allows for politicians north and south to have those discussions also. So Gurmaigat Barry, and thanks again for Ireland's Future for the opportunity to talk to you.
So these mics on? I suppose from there we'll start the discussion. But as I was saying when I was speaking, where I come from is a Republican area, and I have friends when I was growing up who would have said they want a united Ireland. They don't care if it happens and they're poor. But now these same friends have kids and they're married, and when you speak about this now, they'll say, well, no, actually, what matters is, will I be better off? Will I have more money in my pocket? What will it mean for education? What will it mean for health? So it's not as simple as just we want a united Ireland. So I suppose that's where I want to start the discussion is, what do our panellists think? How would a new Ireland be better for people financially? I suppose first of all in the north, and then one of the things I always hear in Dublin, I've been living there now for over 4 years, is I'll often hear people saying, we can't afford Northern Ireland, so we don't want a new Ireland or a united Ireland. So I suppose I'll ask you first, Pearse, because Sinn Féin's finance spokesperson, would people be financially better off in a new Ireland? How do you see it?
Well, I believe they would. It's one of the main kind of areas that we've in Sinn Féin have been targeting the discussion. The discussion will be multifaceted, but part of it is the economics of it. Part of it is the question of how will it impact me and my family, and those concerns have to be addressed. There's been a number of studies that have been done, research papers. The renowned economist Hubner, who's Canadian economist and has been peer reviewed, has done 2 different modelling on what an Irish unity would look like. He did one before the Brexit decision and one after the Brexit decision taken in Brexit. The one before the Brexit decision said Ireland's economy in a united Ireland would be stronger, but even after Brexit, because Brexit has negative consequences north and south, he still believed that in the first decade after reunification that the GDP of the island of Ireland would grow by over 23 billion euro. Now, the majority of that would be in the north. Why? Because the north's standards of living are way below the south.
They're way below, but then at the same time, I have friends who are working and living in Belfast who are earning a lot less than people I know in Dublin, but yet those people in Belfast have mortgages. They've been able to buy their own houses, but yet people in Dublin and other parts of the Republic can't. So even though people in the north are probably earning a lot less, Like, so where do we meet?
Yeah, and that's a real point. Like when you're having these arguments in a way, and especially as somebody who's critical of how the state has developed here in the south, and that's why I make the point about it's not joining the 6th to the 26th. This is an opportunity to reimagine a new nation, a new Ireland. Like, who wants to live in a country where your children aren't going to be able to afford a house? Never mind Dublin, they won't be able to afford a house in Donegal, and the way things are going. So, like, we don't want that. So there's a lot of things that give us an opportunity to fix things here as well in terms of integration of services and so on and so forth. But when you look at all the stats, and some of these are kind of were shocking to me when I started to look at them, and the SRI have published, or Seamus has published them, who works for the SRI. Like, life expectancy in the north is lower. So if you're a girl a baby girl is born in the north compared to in the south, that child is going to die, is likely to die before the child in the south. A lot of that's connected to poverty. The reason being poverty is a lot higher in terms of the north. So poverty leads to worse health outcomes. And then you have an issue in terms of GDP. So GDP per person in the north is 25,000 euro. GDP in the south is 40,000 euro, which gives you opportunities to invest. So one of the biggest challenges we have in terms of the north is education and educational attainment. And we have a model of education in the north that also needs to be developed or worked on. So there is, the issue here is when you model this, when you model what happens to an economy when you put the north and the south together, what the economists are saying, I wouldn't be able to do this, but what the economists are saying, that's going to give a boost to the economy or to GDP. And when GDP goes up, taxation comes in. So that means it allows you to spend more money on services. So, like, the other point here is there's studies that have been done. They're mostly based in relation to the impact of the British government's decision-making in Westminster on Scotland and Wales, but it all equally applies to the north. And the studies show that when decisions are taken far removed from the people that they affect, the impact is quite negative. And obviously we can see that in terms of the north. The British government, they're in the middle of a leadership battle at the minute. Like, they have no interest what's going to happen in Strabane, Derry, or indeed Belfast. Like, their interest is in London, the greater London area, the southeast of England, and so on and so forth. They have little interest in Scotland and Wales, never mind the north. So therefore the decisions that are being taken, good, bad, or indifferent, aren't for the interests of the north. So even reunification, having local government, having government that is accountable, that has fiscal powers, will actually have an impact, an immediate benefit to people's livelihoods, because then you can make the decisions that are closer to the people that you represent.
Okay, Thomas, there's something I just want to touch on that you said, which I found kind of interesting. You said that in a new Ireland you would foresee Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil and Unionists in power, which is something I've never heard before. But I was in Belfast, I was interviewing loyalists a few months ago, and one of the questions I was asking them was, their views on a new Ireland. And I remember interviewing a woman in the Shankill, and I said to her, if a new Ireland resulted in you earning more money, you're able to buy a better car, able to buy a better house, give your kids a better life. She says no. She said, I don't care if a United Ireland or a new Ireland's paved in gold. I'd rather be poor and British than be well off than Irish. You're saying there, you think unionists would be in power here, but see the likes of those loyalists, how do you get them involved in this discussion? Because they don't want to know. And I suppose I kind of understand that, because they're unionists, they're loyalists. A United Ireland completely defeats the purpose of what they're about.
Yeah, that is a difficulty of how do you include those people, but indeed there's people in the south that don't want to know as well, and how do we include those in the conversation too? But the reality, and I mean, it doesn't please me to say it, but the reality is, if we had a United Ireland in the next 5 or 10 years, more than likely Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael and Unionists would be in power in that United Ireland. Now, we need to move on, we need to change, and we need to develop from that to ensure that there's more representation for the people, ordinary people and working people, and that is ordinary loyalists and ordinary Protestants, if we want to say it, in East Belfast and places like that there as well. And we need to be able to work with them and build together as well. I think now, obviously I'm talking from a Donegal perspective and my own perspective, and I don't have full information in relation to this, but I do believe, from what I see from where I am, that loyalism isn't served by unionism, and that they have been done wrong by the unionists. And I think that's what we, as people on the left in the south, have to build alliances and contact with loyalists to ensure that their representation can be enhanced and can be improved, and change that, because I certainly don't want to see unionists, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael together in power in the South or in a united Ireland, but that is what I'm afraid it could happen.
But how do you get them involved when they don't want to know?
I think what Pearse was saying around, you know, like we do have the Good Friday committee, which does an awful lot of work around Ireland, you know. And I do think, like, if we even look at the Shannon going back previous to 2020, there was a person from the North's voice in the House, and I think that itself, like, so it has been done in where we do have people around the table, and I think it's working on from there is a good.
But again, I know what you're saying. Senator Ian Marshall was in the Shannon, but again, he ran in West Tyrone there recently, and it wasn't popular with unionists because they couldn't get in as an MLA. So there is, like I'm saying, there's just some unionists and loyalists do not want to be part of this discussion. And how do we get them involved 5, 10, 15 years down the line? Like, how do we bring them in?
I really believe it's around creating those spaces where people feel safe, where people is not going to feel that they're attacked or that they're under any threat from being in rooms and stuff, you know. I'm sure we moved away from that anyway, but even for me as a member of the traveller community, you know, like, I was taught my whole life I'd never be anything, you know, that you're just a traveller. And I think sometimes we have these thoughts in our own heads, as no matter what communities we come from, and that fear as well, the fear of the unknown. Again, it's conversation, and how do you get people in? You make people part of.
Yeah, and I kind of understand where you're coming from, because I remember speaking to some loyalists in East Belfast, and there was a guy said to me that, you know, when you grow up here, you have two choices. It's you either get a job in the British Army or Harland and Wolff. You know, that's what it was like, and that's kind of drummed into people. And he says now that his kids will leave and they'll live in Scotland or England, and
like, you also have to remember that, like, for me personally, I live in very real times. I know all about intimidation if you're moving forward, being by wider community members, and that's what happens as well. Do you know what I mean? So it's not easy to say to get people involved. We have to create those spaces for people, and just to say, as Pearse said, like, you know, if again, from being from a very from the traveller community, you know, those statistics that Pearse was talking about really struck with me. You know, if anything, being in All Ireland would give us a quality of life. Do you know, that kind of way? It would give us more opportunities as an island. And I know it might sound stupid to say this, because I don't have the answers economically, you know, but I will say, like, for that quality of life, you know, it's better to be an All Ireland, in my opinion.
I think, like, listening to the news over the last while, especially after post-Brexit, a lot of younger families in the north who were, say, from the loyalist or unionist side, all they want to do is have a nice life. They want just a good standard of living. They really, I think, you know, the idea of unionism and loyalism, you know, we have to respect these people, but a lot of families just want to get on with it and just educate their children and have a nice life. And if, like, on the ground level, that's what everybody wants.
Do you think that's where, if there was a referendum in the next 5, 10 years, that's where it will be won, is where you have to convince people that they will have more money in their pockets, or, you know, they will have a better life? Because if you can't convince them that, then the referendum...
A lot of those young families, a lot of them weren't even around during the Troubles. Like, I remember during the Troubles going up, and everything was very segregated in Belfast. You know, you just daren't walk into the wrong place. But now, you know, people are more open, and people are, they want to just have a good standard of living like everyone else. And I think there's a lot more in common than diverse.
And Taiba, you've been here 8 years, you were saying.
Yeah.
Like, what do you make of the place? How much better can we be? You've lived on both sides of the border.
From the conversation that we had in these few minutes, I just want to say that the change is really difficult, and it's a process. And that process is to have a conversation with people you don't agree with. And the most important thing, because of the greater goal, you just go and come back to the table. It's not necessarily that you agree with them. So acceptance, and also I want to emphasize, talking about we have identity for Irish, new definition for being Irish. From my own experience, I just realized that people just trust the government. When they said, put your mask on, they put it, take your mask off. That means that they just believe in the government. If they create a wider definition for being Irish, this is the first step. I know the power of the decision making. First step will bring the people together. And also, I'm aware of some people who are living in the north that part of their identity is being British themselves. So we just accept, make it inclusive. Yeah.
Where do we go, I suppose, Pearse? What if some unionists and loyalists just don't want to become involved in this discussion, and there was a referendum that just says, look, we're not taking part?
There is different ways, I believe in art and music and event and communities to bring people together, and the education can happen in that way. And also the power of training or workshops and try to attract the people to that kind of thing.
And Pearse was just saying, because I have spoken to people from the loyalist community who says that if there ever is a referendum, they just will refuse to take part. Again, how...
Well, there was a referendum in Irish unity. It was in the 70s, and Republicans and Nationalists didn't take part because I think they got a vote of over 90% or something like that there. So this isn't a unique thing. Like, there was a referendum, but it was all to do at the time in terms of it was more propaganda. So, look, loyalism and unionism, it's in the name. Like, you're not going to convince people not to be a loyalist in the morning. Like, neither would you convince me to not be a Republican. That's what we have to do. Is we have to have a mature discussion in relation to what a new Ireland looks like, because there are people there, and it's been mentioned in terms of Thomas has mentioned it a number of times in terms of loyalism being badly served by political unionism. It's not just loyalism, unionism has been badly served as well. They've been sold to this idea. I can remember sitting with loyalists in East Belfast and some of them ex-prisoners, and they've been sold this idea that the glory days are going to continue, that there's the majority rule, all of that. In the last 6 elections, unionism lost the majority. That's why I would differ with Thomas in relation to that. Unionism is in a minority in the south, and Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael are a minority. Sorry, unionism are a minority in the north, and Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael are a minority in the south, and I hope to keep it that way. But no matter what way the configurations happen in the future, unionism has lost its majority. It's lost its majority for 6-7 consecutive elections now, and that majority is dwindling. And they have this idea that there's going to nearly a return to the empire and all that. That's not going to happen. Things are changing. We've seen it in terms of the demographic changes that have happened. We've seen it in terms of Belfast. So you've seen it in terms of the flag protests. My colleague Alex Maskey was, when he was first elected in 1983 as a Sinn Féin councillor, they locked the doors, they sprayed air freshener behind him, threw oranges at him. Like, Sinn Féin nationalism now are the dominant persuasion in that council, and Sinn Féin the large party. There has been demographic changes. So if loyalism don't where I come from this, Barry, there's going to be a referendum in Irish unity. That's without a doubt. We have the Good Friday Agreement. The Good Friday Agreement is also judicially reviewable, so you can go to the court in relation to it. The problem with the terms in the Good Friday Agreement, it's vague because it leaves it up to the Secretary of State to a certain point. But you can see the momentum. There is more and more people supporting that idea.
And do you think it's inevitable? Like, how soon do you think
the referendum? The referendum, in my view, is inevitable, and I think unionism have accepted that. Remember Peter Robinson's comments in Glenties 4 years ago. Like, that was a wake-up call to unionism, where he talked about preparing for the referendum. Unionism knows there's a referendum coming.
But how soon do you think
Well, we
it
want
can
to see
happen?
the referendum within 5 years. What we don't want is we don't want a Brexit scenario where you have a referendum without a discussion. That's why there's an onus on us, on all of us, but particularly on the Irish government to set out a discussion document in terms of what does unity look like. So if loyalism decide not to engage in the referendum, then they don't vote. That's what will happen. Some people will engage when they recognise that there is a decision to be made, a conversation to have. They'll engage to actually counter that, and that's fine, that's the democratic process. What we need, in our view, is because there's a lot of people there from unionism and loyalism who are convinced in some way that this is that the South is a backward Catholic state controlled by the bishops, and that they will have no rights, that we will ban everything, we'll burn everything to do with their identity and all the rest. And really what the conversation we need to have, and I think it does need to be led at government level, is the type of inclusive society, New Ireland, we want. Unionism is part of our history. Orangeism is part of our history. It is also going to be part of our future, and we need to explain that. I'll finish on this, Barry. I got a call one night, actually at home, and the person was a member of the Orange Order, and it said, Pearse, tell me this. If you get a United Ireland, as the way he put it, if you get a United Ireland, are you going to ban us marching on the 12th of July? And the point I made to him is, I says, such and such, I says, there's not one thread more green in our flag than there is orange. Orangeism is a part of our history, it's a part of our future, and it's those type of conversations we
Would
need
the
to
12th
have.
be a national holiday then in a New Ireland?
Well, and Easter Sunday as well, we're trying to get for many years. But they're the discussions you need to have. Like you come to, was it Thomas that made the point that we don't all have the answers here? This needs to be inclusive. Like everything needs to be discussed, and people like I'll come at it and saying the tricolour is the best symbol for a new Ireland.
We often hear these discussions too. I suppose I'll give you a chance to speak as well, Thomas. But like a new flag, a new anthem. Like, do you think that will be the case?
Definitely.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's too warlike.
Well, to be honest with you, I wouldn't be hung up on a flag or an anthem or that. I think what's more important is to have a united Ireland and to have all of our citizens working together for the benefit of each other. I think that's more important. Whether that, now, I would draw the line with Union Jack being the flag out there, but I think we should be open to change in terms of. I do believe, and I would be attached to the tricolour, but I'm not attached to it to make it a deal breaker. In relation to United Ireland, so I think those things like flags and stuff like that are symbols, and they're not really as important as getting people on board and getting people to work together. I think that's the important thing.
And how soon do you think a referendum will happen?
Well, a referendum could happen next year if they wanted it to happen, and if the Brits allow it to happen. But I think probably realistically, I think we should be looking towards the referendum by 2030 anyway. And and this conversation should be continuing along this way and finalising and talking about what.
So kind of looking long term. Say if the census results in Northern Ireland when they come out, if it is 51% nationalists now, and the Secretary of State decides, look, we can have a referendum next year, would that be too soon?
It probably would be too soon because we're not ready for it here, and and I think one thing, the factor that we have no control over in relation to this as well is what actually attitude the Brits are going to carry towards a United Ireland, and how they're actually going to behave after a United Ireland too is going to be very important, because I think that will do a lot in terms of how it is actually perceived in all communities and that there, and what the potential for any trouble or anything afterwards as well would be very important. So we have a job to do. We have a job to do as well to make sure that the British play an honourable role in relation to it. And the history wouldn't show you that they're going to do that. Taiba mentioned a former British colony, Sudan, has had problems ever since. And we don't have to look too far to any other British colonies. So that work is going to happen as well. And Ireland, as a state, is going to have to make sure that the British play their part in relation to making this happen as well.
I know I keep mentioning unionists and loyalists and how you convince them, but how do you convince maybe the people in the north who, when they talk about health, like in this new Ireland, are we going to have an All-Ireland NHS or an All-Ireland HSE, or what would work best? I know both health services are certainly not no utopia, both are facing waiting lists, but at least in Northern Ireland you don't have to pay 60 quid every time you go see a doctor.
Yeah, and there's no reason why you should have to pay it in the south either, and that's because we have Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael that we have that. But those are things that we have to change, and there is no doubt that the health services in the north isn't perfect either. Like, I know, for example, somebody who lived in Donegal and in the north, who was diagnosed with cancer, and she was advised by the health services in the north to get her treatment in Donegal because it was better. You know, that goes against the argument that anybody would say about the health services. You know, so but the difference is that you know, we could build a health service for everybody, because we would have the population, we would have the critical mass, and we'd have to make it happen. It wouldn't be an NHS, it wouldn't be health, what do you call them, in the south, but it would be a health service for a united Ireland, and that's what's important. And we would all have a say in what it actually do as well, and that's important. And I think that's what I would say to loyalists and unionists and stuff like that as well, that would have doubts, and ordinary people in the north that would have the doubts. If they want to have a say in the service that they can provide in a united Ireland, that they'll have that say. They won't have that say in staying in part of the United Kingdom.
Okay, just before we go to the question and answer session, we just want to show two very short videos. The first one is the Colin Harvey video that Pearse mentioned at the beginning. And we've also got two young members of the Ireland's Future Working Group, both lads from a unionist British background. I think one of them's Andrew, who I've interviewed before. So we're just going to show them before we go to the Q&A.
My name is Colin Harvey. I'm Professor in the School of Law at Queen's University Belfast. I'm also on the Management Board of Ireland's Future. I want you to do something for me today. I want to imagine you're there on the night that the referendum results are announced and there's a vote for constitutional change. And I want you to think about how you're going to feel that night, who you're going to be thinking about and who you're going to embrace. You want to be able to say, I was there at the waterfront. I was there at the 3 Arena. I was there. I joined the conversation about a new and united Ireland. I've worked my entire life for equality and human rights. I take the language of a new and united Ireland very, very seriously indeed. This is about your future. This is about the future of everyone on this island. I please, please, please urge you all to take part, join the conversation about shaping a new and united Ireland. Join us in the 3 Arena on the 1st of October in Dublin. Play your part in the journey towards constitutional change in Ireland. We are inviting you to be part of making history. We want to get this right, but our focus is on widespread civic dialogue and participation, inclusive, generous, and the spirit of the Good Friday Agreement. That's why we're calling for an all-Ireland Citizens' Assembly to be established immediately. Join us on this journey of transforming Ireland. Together we can.
Every generation should decide its own future.
It's time for us to join the conversation too.
There is such a massive referendum, massive campaign in Britain.
Yeah.
Despite all of us screaming and shouting, there was barely any mention of, let alone the north, the border.
Yeah.
And I think that, for me, almost defines it. I feel like a lot of the time Westminster will sort itself out, and then if it has time, it'll look at us and it'll look at other spots, and you're almost endorsing partition out of a fear of how people will react to a change to the status quo. And really, people just want to talk and they want to just fix their communities. They want to get up and go to work and have a nice life. And increasingly since Brexit, it's looked like not necessarily the United Kingdom is the best way to do that. I feel a change in some form, a lot more people are now realising is necessary, and for a lot of those people, staying with the union isn't necessarily ironclad anymore.
So I think since Brexit, the conversation is polarised in Britain, and it would be good to have a sensible talk about what future we might have together, rather than continuing to polarise the situation, to come together to a common ground.
I'm very tired of hearing from people in Britain that it's, our way or the highway. I think there's voices here and there's people here who need to have their opinions heard because it's their home. And
to be fair to them, I do think the United Kingdom, very large nation, Northern Ireland by comparison is very small. So I can see why it isn't top of the priority list all the time, but that's exactly the point that we should be having as people from Northern Ireland. I think rather than being an afterthought, as you said, and we are going to be an afterthought because we're such a small constituent part of the United Kingdom, I think we should take control into our own hands in that and advance the discussion in Ireland itself rather than waiting for it to happen in Great Britain.
Okay, so we'll go to the question and answer session now. We'll do this for the next 25, 30 minutes until 8:30. So anybody has any questions, put your hand up. Jerry, I'll come over to you with a mic. So just say who your question's for and work away.
Right, okay. Sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah.
That's good, that's good. Sorry, Thomas, just, my name's Pearse Doherty. I'm from Mullaban, South Armagh. And maybe from my accent you'll know I did live in Belfast for quite a while. First of all, Thomas, you have this idea that unionists will align with Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. The unionist parties may. I know loads and loads and loads of unionists who are all very left-wing, working-class trade unionists. They're not going to support Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil. It's just not in their blood to do such a thing. Matter of fact, I'd see them coming towards Sinn Féin before anybody else in a new Ireland. I'm sorry, I'm really bad with names, but Eileen. I grew up in the Troubles, as it was called in the early part, and during the programmes in the late 60s, when people were being burnt out of houses, mostly Catholics, some Protestants, mostly Catholics, people had to gather their bits and pieces and move to nationalist areas. Now, not an awful lot of people had lorries. Travellers did. There's a hidden part of traveller history where travellers went to loyalist areas and helped Catholics to move away to safety, risked their lives to do it. And most people who come from working class Belfast remember that. Now, Maria as well. I'm not going to give off to everybody. Maria, I know Linda. Linda's in Donegal at the minute. I know Linda from when she was a child. Her history is very diverse, but as well as that, there's an awful lot of people like Linda who were brought up in the 30s and 40s, Protestants who speak Irish and have great love for the Irish language. Very strong in their, like the Clonard, you probably know in Belfast. But I'll get to the point that I wanted to say. As I say, from my accent, you'd know that I'm from Belfast for part of my life anyway, and I know a lot of soft unionists as well as hardline unionists. No friends of mine who are loyalists and done time and all sorts. But things have changed. The whole Brexit thing has changed things dramatically. An awful lot of these unionists look forward to a united, or look at a united Ireland, or a new Ireland. Not necessarily welcome it, but are prepared to talk about it, prepared to listen about it, and prepared to be engaged. And they don't always see it, and too many people, I think, say the new Ireland it's wealthier, it's going to have a better health system, it's going to be this, it's going to be that. Me, I'm a Republican. I've always been a Republican. I would want the United Ireland, even if it was poorer for me and my family. That is where I am. But there's going to be a lot of unionists who feel the same about being British. They'd live in a ditch rather than go to United Ireland. My question really is for Pearse, and I'm sorry this is the first one, but for Pearse and Sinn Féin in particular, how are we going to engage with working class Protestants sitting in Rathcoole or East Belfast or South Derry who don't want to be engaged? How are we going to get them to talk and listen rather than go back in the dark cell and just ignore everything? Because I think engagement is more than crucial. I think it's essential for all of us. And I'm really glad to hear the diverse opinions here. I think I didn't expect, I don't know why I didn't expect it. I've seen the list of names, but to have them issues raised, and I think, yes, they are very important for us in New Ireland. And the other thing is this, I was at the West Belfast Festival there a number of weeks ago, and there was a statistician talking in one of the presentations, and he was saying the new majority in the north for United Ireland, those people are not just born, they're in school, they're in secondary school. This is all happening very quickly. It's going to happen a lot quicker than people think. And we need to be all on board and ready for it and raise these issues that you were talking about, minority rights, whether it's Irish language or travellers or anything, but all need to be raised in this new forum. We need to be starting to talk about it and engaging with it very, very soon. So thank you.
Okay, anybody? Who's got the mic? The lady in the black t-shirt.
My question's for the panel, and it kind of boils down to one word: education. What would education look like in a united Ireland? Because right now, it's still segregated in the north, and the bishops, unfortunately, still have their boot on the necks of everyone when it comes to education in the Republic. It's over 90% Catholic. There's no room in the present model for what a truly national school system would look like for everybody island-wide. Now, there's a growing movement, at least growing in numbers, of Gael schools around the country. How could that model, in a sort of idealized, what your hopes or dreams would be for what education would look like in United Ireland? Thank you.
Anyone want to go first and answer now?
Just in relation to the first question there about the unionists, and I hope there is moderate unionists that won't want to be part of Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael and part of a unionist Fianna Fáil Fine Gael coalition, the grand government in the United Ireland when it happens. I hope there will be. And hopefully that will come to pass. In relation to the schools and education, these are the things that have to be discussed and have to be talked about and sorted out. And there's no doubt that education in the south needs a lot of work on it as well. So I think everything you're talking about is about a new Ireland. So it'll be new education, new health services, and it's about delivering that. And that's the conversations that we need to thrash out. I don't have a solution or solutions in relation to it, I'm sorry, but I think that has to be thrashed out as part of the conversation as well. Thanks.
Do you have a dream of it? What would you envision for?
Well, I have dreams about it. I have dreams about it as well. I have nightmares about I have nightmares about unionism, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael in power, but and unfortunately, I think that nightmare might come true before any of my other dreams come true. But I think what we should have, and I think as the model around Gael schools is vitally important, and that should be developed. And I think the Educate Together model should be rolled out and become more important as well. And we have a lot of work to do in the south in relation to that as well too, because a lot of people in the south in relation to, and this might be getting off the track a wee bit, but a lot of people in the south in relation to national schools and that, they're happy to let the priest do it. And that's what it's about. It's about, we just don't want to be bothered by it. And people have to take control and have to be able to decide that that's not enough just to be happy with it, to let it go on. So we need to change that in the south as well. I don't know how the education system in the north works in total as well, but it definitely needs to change in the north as well too. And it has permanently segregated the population in the north at all times through the crisis. So it has to change, but it has to change on an all-island basis. So I don't think pushing our education model into the north is going to work, or pushing their model down here. I think around Gael schools and around Educate Together is a model that could possibly make the changes, but there's going to be a lot of acceptance needed to do that. And people in the south are going to have to realise that they're going to have to do a bit of work as well too, so that's going to make a difference.
Yeah, 100% agree with Thomas, and I do think if I was to look at ideal schools, I know the Educate Together schools are really important, and the disadvantaged schools, and I do think that in the last number of years we've come a long way when it comes to education and inclusive within our education system. Of course, we've got an awful long way to go as well for a true good education system. We all have free access to education, but once you get in the door, you're meant to pay a little fund that could be up to €400-500, and if you didn't pay that fund, you mightn't be treated the same as other parents. So as Thomas said, we've got big problems in our education system in general, in the south as well. So that's what I would say in different schools. If you have people who have got, we have to remember a lot of people do have their religious values, and we have to not discriminate against people with their religious values either. Do you know what I mean? So it's creating those spaces for us all to be part of an equal Ireland, and that's what it's about. Like, again, there's room for us all. And I've heard a few times this evening people saying, what if people don't want to be involved in these conversations? I think is giving the choice and the opportunity and creating the spaces for people to be involved. And this may sound, but my mother used to say, you can bring a horse to the water, but you can't make him drink it. Do you know what I mean? And I think it's having the opportunity. And if people, and again, Pearse said in the 70s, and I know I would have known there was a referendum in the 70s, but again, look, when we had the divorce referendum, people didn't want divorce first in Ireland. Then the second time around, like as years went on and they knew how tough it was, they then changed their minds. And again, I think it's a slow process, but giving people the opportunity, I think, is the key, and involving people is the key. If they don't want to be involved, well then that's their choice. Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to agree with Eileen on the example that she mentioned, that Educate Together was really safe space for my children, because there is no religion was there, and there is very diverse, and it is inclusive, and there is policy, and it is applied, you know, it's something real. I can see that it's visual. And also I want to answer Sharon. This space is for raising the questions and to keep our brains thinking about that. And also, we just need to know that it's a difficult conversation we need to have. And we just say it's difficult, but we need to say it to reach somewhere. So we are not necessarily have the answers, but it is great to raise the questions, so we think about it.
Can I just say something? I used to be a teacher, primary school teacher, in another life. And the same problems nowadays happening as it was then, we'll say 30 years ago. It's the ratio of teachers and children. And even in the Gael schools now, the ratio is getting higher by the day. I was reading the paper yesterday, and the average number now in Gael schools is 40 per school or per classroom. And that's the way it was when I was teaching before I went fiddling. So I think I'll stick to the fiddle. But that's, so therefore the Gael schools became very popular because they had smaller numbers in the classrooms, but now they're so popular that the thing has gone desert. So we have to invest more money in education and health and housing, and maybe we'll see a better future.
100%.
Okay. The question of education is a really good one, a really tricky one, and a really sensitive one. I think Eileen actually made a very good point in terms of creating the spaces. But I think when we talk about context, we also have to reckon that people will come to this issue of a new Ireland and constitutional change with excitement, with hope. That's me. But there's other people who come at it with fear of what I'm going to lose, fear of that I'm going to lose. For some people, that the idea that they're going to take away all the grammar schools, they're going to force us all to do this, and that's really important. And that's why that we have to listen first of all to those who have those concerns, because there will be concerns, and we have to create that space for it to be inclusive. And there is an opportunity here to map something out. It's not going to happen overnight. There will be a referendum. Decision will happen overnight, and then there'll be a transition period in terms of what that will look like and how we will morph two different parts of our island together, in my view, after a positive outcome of that referendum. So, we know the discussions in the South. We know why we had the influence in the church in the past in terms of both health and education, because they dictated those responsibilities, they stepped in. But you can even see in terms of the National Maternity Hospital, those discussions in terms of the sector, and that's the way the future has to be. But we also have to deal with what is already there, and that needs to be dealt with in a sensitive way, where parental choice is part of it, and in a very inclusive way, and without stoking fear or tensions in relation to that. In terms of how you're going to engage with working class unionists, some of that engagement is happening, as you know. Like years ago, I shared a panel in Derry, with some unionist leaders at the time, talking about United Ireland, them arguing against it. It's not not in the interest of unionism at this political unionism at this point in time to actually have those discussions or engagement, because what they're selling is the idea that it's never going to happen. And you mentioned the statisticians. Anybody who looks at the evidence, looks at what's happening, and will see it. Barry, you mentioned the census, which is a very crude way, of looking at, what are people's political opinions in terms of United Ireland, but they do give some indication. David McWilliams has put it very clearly. Like when the North was created, the reason Donegal wasn't part of it is because they wanted that unionist inbuilt majority of 2/3. He makes the point that those of the age of 90, from a unionist persuasion, are 2/3 of 90-year-olds in the North, but under 5s, 2/3 would come from nationalist areas, and that's the change that has happened. The BBC, I think, put it best after the last election. This was never supposed to happen. These borders were created to make sure Michelle O'Neill or a Republican would ever become First Minister. Those demographic changes are being shown in election results in the last 7 years, but as you make the point that the children are already born. If you look at all the opinion polls that have been carried out in recent times in terms of those that support unity and those that support the current constitutional situation or the union, you will see that the margins have been narrowing. Still not enough in my view, but I remember Scotland never got over nearly 30% until the debate started. That's why I think the debate will be crucial. But the crucial thing is the younger demographic. It is in the nearly 60% that it is in support, or high 50s that are in support of Irish unity. Demographics have changed in the North. And when unionism recognise that, when unionism are stopped, fed this kind of line that everything's going to remain the same, that I think people will, because it's in their interest. And some of it's already happening. We see it with business leaders. They're interested in what this is going to mean. They're looking at the markets. Farmers are looking at what it means in terms of back into the European Union, in terms of cap payments. Those who are involved in research are looking at, we've lost all this research funding. There's different people. There's a loyalist who mentioned to me, and he says, don't get carried away, Pearse, I'm not supporting, Sinn Féin or Irish unity, but for the first time ever, I would consider voting for Irish unity for the simple reason I despise the fact that my European identity has been taken away from me and my children. So they don't believe in Irish unity, but they believe in what they see as an inclusive European Union and so on and so forth. So we have to meet people at where they're at, whether it's an All-Ireland soccer team to try and get better outcomes, or whether it's the economy, or whether it's health, or whether it's whatever. The biggest concern we see all the time from both nationalists, particularly from nationalist community, because there was a question in terms of how do you persuade of nationalism as well, is the health service. And that's where there's a responsibility on us as well. There is a plan, but the plan hasn't been implemented to build a public service, free the point of delivery health service. But again, that's a fear that people have, and a very legitimate fear. Do I have to pay for the doctor? Will I have to pay for such and such and all that? So those are the kind of discussions that we need to have in a more deeper way, and I think this is very welcome.
I just want to ask you, Pearse, I think terminology is very important to bring these people together. A united Ireland has a very emotive, it's an emotive word. It goes back to nationalism. It's very, united Irishmen, all of that. I think we have to think of a new terminology for the future to bring everybody together. What do you think of that?
I agree, and that I've referenced a number of times about a new Ireland. There's all of that, and indeed, look, everybody will use their own phraseology, and we in a campaign, because we have to make sure we secure a referendum, but we have to win it. There has to be young people that are campaigning on young people's issues. There has to be, different people from the left, from the, all different campaigns in this year, and they'll have their own terminology. But even a United Ireland suggests that we want to stitch the 6 to the 26, which isn't what we want.
Going to get a few more questions just from the audience. Gary, you had a question, did you?
No, it's good to hear the debate and a lot of interesting stuff came up there. I think there's a presumption that every Protestant is a unionist and every Catholic is a nationalist. That's just not true. Some of the biggest unionists I know are actually Catholics, and I've spoke to a lot of people within the Protestant community who've got Irish passports, and I spoke to one person in particular who was, in her view, very hurt and wronged by Republicans, but had said to me, I by sign. We talked about terminology here, and terminology is very important. United Ireland means nothing to me. It could be united under the Commonwealth. What does that united mean? There's going to be no society that is completely united. But I think in terms, you know, you're either a Democrat or you're not. And if it's going to be a new Ireland, a united Ireland, to me it has to be a sovereign Ireland, not sovereign Ireland, it has to be a socialist republic that you know, that so much was invested upon. But where I have a problem and where it goes, and I'm not trying to spoil the mood or anything, but I think it's very important to say, you know, I think that we don't have democracy in Ireland. We have a counter-democratic process which comes from partition, and that's come across very clear tonight, where nobody can say, you know, when it's going to happen, if the Brits is going to allow us to happen. We have the triple lock and all of that. So for me as a Republican, I just don't have the same, they put it mildly, the same confidence or the same as what's coming from the panel. But there's also talk about, you know, the Brits are putting in legislation through the Lords, or plan to put legislation through the Lords that any matter of constitutional nature, that there has to be, like, say, like 65% turnout, and that it can't be a 50% you know, majority. It would have to be whatever. And you know, that come from on the back, or being muted on the back of the Scottish vote. But obviously they have an eye here on Ireland too. So say for instance some of that stuff did come out, or even if it didn't, and I don't see it as a referendum, I see it as a border poll, and it's counter-democratic. You know, that's to me, it's very, very straightforward. It seems to be the only show in town. It's the only way that, now I don't have an alternative, but that's what it is. But where there isn't an alternative, or not at this minute, it's still counter-democratic. If the border poll went wrong, would it be the first time that British rule in Ireland has been legitimised? If that was to happen. But I welcome the debate, and I welcome, you know, what's being said.
So does anybody want to go first? Is that, do any have that fear that the border poll could be defeated, and then that's it, game over?
Yeah, well, no. Well, first of all, so let me go at the last point in terms of the people north and south voted for the Good Friday Agreement. So they voted for the principle of consent. They voted for the border poll. So the people have cast judgment on that issue. So therefore we have a mechanism, as imperfect as it is, but it's a mechanism in where the imperfect, what's the word I'm looking for? The problems with it is there's some vagueness in relation to this, but it is an international agreement. This isn't just a British government piece of legislation. It's not an internal matter in terms of what's happening with Scotland. This is an international agreement with papers lodged at the UN between two sovereign governments, ratified north and south by the people of Ireland. And it is judicially reviewable, as it has been reviewed in the past through the courts. So yes, we can't say that there's when the date is, but what we can say is that there is a legal binding responsibility on the Secretary of State to call that referendum when he or she believes that there is a change likely to the constitutional nature of the island or of the north, and that is going to happen because of conversations we've had earlier and demographic changes and so on, and the momentum. I've sat with the Secretary of State in the past and put it to him in relation to the criteria for calling that, and he made the point, like we showed the opinion polls, we showed the elections, and made the point, he goes, if I call this a referendum, I can be taken to court if I get it wrong. So I have to know that the evidence is right. So the opposite happens as well. When more and more people are showing the desire for constitutional change, you can also be taken to the court to force a referendum. But that isn't the core issue at the minute, because I'm convinced there's going to be a referendum. Unionism know there's going to be a referendum. That's not the problem. The problem here is we need to have the discussion beforehand. We need to know as inclusive as possible, but also within those who believe in Irish unity, because you're not going to force unionism to come and say, let's plan this with us, you know, at this point in time. Some of them will because they recognise the inevitability or whatever, but if they're unionists, they want to be with the union. They may have been unionists in the past and now see the merits of a new Ireland, and that means they're kind of different. So, but we need to plan to say, what does this look like? Because what we don't want is a Brexit scenario where, as Colin Harvey says, you've had the election, the referendum's happened, and what's your final thoughts? Oh, well, what happens next? That's why there needs to be this discussion led at a civic level and at a governmental level, at an international level, and these conversations are happening internationally as well in terms of supports for Irish unity. So I don't think it's there is a pathway there, and I think that pathway will be successful. The last point is if the referendum is lost, so there's two referendums, one in each, one in the north and one in the south. All the opinion polls have showed that there's about 70% support for unity or above in the south. You don't take that for granted. In the north, obviously, there's challenge there. If it's lost, what happens, what the Good Friday Agreement says is that another referendum can happen in 7 years' time. And that's where you would be dusting down again, you'd be starting at it again, and again, the same binding principle applies under the Good Friday Agreement that the referendum has to be triggered, but it can't be triggered before 7 years. So it's not like the Scots, where they have to convince the British government to give them. We have that. We have a pathway. We just have to convince people of the benefits of a new Ireland, and I think that's possible. I really do. I think that if we get our acts together, there'll be certain people that will be convinced because of what we say. There'll be certain people that will be convinced because of what you say. We all will speak to different audiences. Some of us will overlap, but the most important thing is the conversation needs to belong to all of us, and we need to start to have that conversation in a serious way. I think a lot of people don't actually. If people actually believed and seen where the changes are happening in the north, if they believed that there was a referendum, there would be far more excitement across this state than there is. A lot of people still don't think it's going to happen. They're thinking, yeah, that would be nice, or whatever, but they don't think it's going to happen. It is going to happen. It's going to happen within a number of years, and we need to get organised.
Just out of interest, we'll take a few more questions because we need to wrap up soon, but is there anybody here who doesn't want a referendum? There probably isn't, is there? No. Border poll? Would there be anybody here who would vote against a new Ireland or a united Ireland, as they're saying? No. But I see the guy in the wine-coloured shirt has a question. If we give the mic over to him.
I think there's some great contributions there from the panellists, and one thing that's just striking me is there's consensus that we need to unite people in order to truly unite Ireland. But I think what's been lost, maybe not necessarily in this room, but definitely in the media, and when this comes up in discussion in public, is there's an illusion, in my opinion, out there that people feel you have to unite the people in advance, completely in advance of a border poll. I don't think that's possible. I think most people in here, being honest themselves, know that that's not possible. We haven't even united all the groups within Southern Ireland fully. We've heard about minorities. We've heard about different barriers that are still there. So I think one thing we really need to focus on, in my opinion, momentum towards a united Ireland is unstoppable. It's going to happen. And whether unionists want to be part of the discussion or not, it's going to happen. We can't, as much as we should be inviting them in, we can't have a scenario where there's an orange veto, which there's a lot of people in the Republic who would be of the opinion that, you can't do it, you have a majority of unionists. I would disagree with that, but I would be wholeheartedly behind inclusive, an awful lot of investment into the communities like the Shankill, like those areas that are never going to vote for United Ireland. And that's something that Pearse talked about, a transition period, that's going to go on for decades after. And I think that needs a serious look at. Where is that investment going to come from? In my opinion, the EU have a major role to play here. They have a duty. So does the US government and the British government as co-guarantors of the Good Friday Agreement, and that stretches beyond a border poll. And I think they need to be lobbied hard by all parties and by the Irish government to commit to, what's the financial package here? I'm speaking as a secondary school teacher out in Loreto Milford, and we were very lucky to be involved in a cross-border initiative under the Shared Island Department of the Taoiseach. And we were involved with a school from Ballycastle and a school from Ardoyne, and it was brilliant. Now, it was a shame because COVID hit and we didn't get to actually meet up, but there was a lot of online discussions, and it's amazing the common ground that could be found between the groups. The young people are way ahead of the politicians on this, and what we found was, surprised our group in Loreto. We expected, the Ballyclare school, it was a very Protestant, unionist oriented school. We thought, all right, this is going to be,
There's going to be major opposition here when we mention United Ireland. We thought it was one of the things was on that we were passionate about, or in our group, and it didn't completely scare them off. We weren't going to convince them, but when it came to finding common ground, it was mental health, it was LGBT plus issues that they were identifying, it was, you know, job opportunities, economic opportunities. We're now involved in another project, International Fund for Ireland project with Portadown, and like 100,000 has been spent on that, which is an awful lot of money for just 2 schools, 20 students in our school, 20 students in their school. It's only beginning, we haven't even met them yet, so it's going to run this year. But to me, that's the kind of investment you're looking at. So, and that's just at school level, you know, and this is supposed to stretch out into the community. We have to bring in the community into this as well, but in my opinion, this is going to take decades of funding, and it needs to be really looked at. Where's that going to come from, and you know, who's committed to it?
Yeah, and just the man beside you, Natai, has a question.
Yeah, I think one thing that we need to concentrate on in the United Ireland project is the complete revamping of the southern state. Now, I don't want to go on long on this tonight, but I was a first-generation lawyer in UCD and was a scholarship boy. And I remember my interview with a guy called Sir Eric Plunkett of the Grenadier Guards. Is your father-in-law? Is your mother-in-law? No, Mr. Plunkett, I didn't call him the sir. I'm not married. Ew, and why are you doing law? I blasted him. That year I'd run for Ireland in the 1500 in Irish universities. I came up the hard way in the boarding in St. Columns. You went in as a boy, you came out as a man. I said, Mr. Plunkett, I was a foot soldier for the Northern Ireland Civil Rights Association in my A-level year, and I'm a Republican in the tradition of the United Irishmen, of Catholic, Protestant and dissenter, in the common name of Irishman. I have no time for prejudice or Castle Catholics or wealth and power, but I do believe in civil rights. Email Sean, you're most welcome. Now the point is, there's a mafia in Dublin, and I want to be brief on this. Number one, you have the middle-class Jesuit Catholics infesting in South County Dublin and south of the River Liffey. You have the descendants of Grattan's Parliament, aided and abetted by the Duke of Westminster, that own most of the ground rents in Dublin City. There's more of a West British smell, and I'm going to the 50th graduation in the next 2 weeks of my class. I'm not looking forward to it, because when I was there, I felt like a life peer of the Labour Party in the House of Lords in Britain, surrounded by Tories. There,
just be mindful of time. Just do you have a question, do you? Because we're running out of time.
The first thing is, you have got to tackle the wealth problem in the Dáil, the landlord's business. The first thing is that you have a complete Dublin-centric state. The second thing you have is we don't have a democracy because the permanent civil service run the country. So for a united Ireland, I would want a separation of the government from the legislature and the judiciary. I also think, in the context of Ulster, I'll throw this out, that we should have a provincial parliaments like Australia, that we have a 9-county Ulster, we have Connacht with their parliament in Galway, we've one for Munster, we've one for the rest of Leinster and Athlone, and we've one in Kilmainham for Dublin City and County. We have a federal constitution that divides up the money equally per capita and a levelling up fund. This so-called republic we have, that I have witnessed in my lifetime, has an iron curtain from Dundalk to Galway, and north of that line and to the people of Donegal is like Lazarus at the rich man's table. Let's call a spade a spade. There are 3 Ulster counties in the sundered province in the Republic, or so-called Republic, the 26 counties. Those 3 counties don't have 1 centimetre of rail. The rest of the Republic do. So the first thing you have to do in your United Ireland is The government must run the country, not the civil service. You take your top civil servants in when you're elected. And if you're the minister in charge of a department, you don't allow a civil servant to be running the country, as is happening at the present. We're living in a neoliberal fascist state. We have no, people aren't even getting housed at the moment. They won't even build an outdoor shack or toilet.
Okay, as I said, we're just mindful of time. Do you have a question before we wrap it up?
My question is, you've got to look at the structures of government and call out the present system, but it's not working. It's not fit.
Is there a
for
question
purpose.
before we wrap up?
My question is, how are you going to get rid of the vested interests in Dublin? How are you going to ensure that it's a genuine, inclusive republic? And we're not going to have the 20th wealthiest families and the vulture funds running the country. It's time we grew up in this country and had a real democracy.
I think we'll wrap it up there because we've gone 10 minutes over time, but thanks everybody for turning out tonight. And again, I suppose that's it wrapped up for now because we've gone 10 minutes over time.
Can I just say that investing in young people, I think, is a really vital part of a united Ireland. And I know that Thomas recently tried to get to lower the age of voting. Thomas Pringle did. I know you want talking to Thomas for young people and the importance of young people. And again, I was involved in a lot of those cross-border youth work, if you want. I can't really think of the proper name for it right now, and I know it works, and youth work is just so important and young people to be part of these conversations to say, so yeah.
Okay. We'll wrap it up there, folks. Everybody, thanks for turning out tonight, and again, I suppose we've got the big event, the 3 Arena on October 1st, so if anybody wants to come along, but thanks, and you can watch it back online as well.
How are you?